Hi everyone, welcome to the Octopath Traveler spoiler mode.
Oh, keeping it nice and calm.
Yeah, keeping it nice and calm. We've got a big RPG to talk about. Just settle in.
Oh.
You know, a metaphorical blanket going over you right now as we get into these 8 character stories.
Ooh.
Hopefully it should go without mention. But if you have not finished Octopath Traveler's story, all of it, every little bit of it, don't watch this unless you don't care about spoilers, because we're gonna get right into it.
When?
Right now.
Spoiler mode, final warning, spoiler mode, activated.
Brandon, this is a game that has 8 characters in it whose stories, until the very end, are largely separated, I think it's fair to say. And it's going to be maybe difficult to go into every single one of them in great detail. And so the way that I'm going to open up this conversation to you, Mr. Brandon Jones, is which characters did you gravitate to? Which really resonated with you?
I picked the hunter right away. It's got to be Honnet. I don't know how
Honnet.
to
They say Honnet. I believe. Yeah.
I turned the just say it right at the top. I turned the voiceover off immediately because I just wanted to get through the story really fast, and I didn't want to keep the consistent feeling I was cutting people off.
Yeah.
There was also like it was interesting going back and playing moments, watching your footage for the review, and seeing moments that were picked up or not, you know, that like, oh yes, people talked during this. Very surprised no one talked during the ending. Not to jump straight to the ending, but like the ending didn't have a lot of voice acting, and I'm like, it's the end. Come on.
They did some of the like father.
Huh?
They did
What?
some work. Yeah, they did
that
some
kind
of
of
that
stuff. So yeah, that kind of stuff to sprinkle emotion on the scene. But so I never actually heard her name pronounced throughout the game. But love the bow, love the beast interaction, love, you know, it was very much World of Warcraft, and so gravitated naturally towards that character. And I think those were the characters that I liked. I think Primrose and Honnet were my favorite campaigns, next to Cyrus, who I really liked because I just love the macabre, any kind of necromancy game, you know, like zombies and Halloween and all that. I love that. And that's, I was bummed. I was showing it to a friend of mine, and I said, unfortunately, there is no haunted house level. There are spooky areas you go into, and there are zombies and stuff, but there was no like scary part of the game, where a lot of RPGs I've played in the past at least had like some kind of turn there. So I think Honnet and Primroses were my favorite because they had a very clear direction the entire time.
See, that's actually the first point where I'll disagree.
Yeah.
Is I think Primrose's character had a very clear direction the whole time, but I ended up kind of being a little bit disappointed in the final villain and how he entered the scene, what his motivations ended up being, and kind of how he presented himself in the last chapter.
It was a little out of left field. It was kind of done intentionally. It almost seems like let's throw this character in there only because it'll be a huge surprise. Right. And obviously, Primrose is a character that is very potentially vulnerable because she's put herself out there. She's had to live this like quote unquote lie kind of like her entire life. Yeah. And so obviously to have somebody very close to her betray her at the end is like, that would be catastrophic, but is kind of predictable at the same time. Also a big musical theater fan, so I was there for that last boss fight. That was really great.
Yeah,
and I
wish the presentation of that was nice.
And I wish they would have done a little bit more, but I'm guessing there were like these faceless kind of actors of them that were like, they were also playing with him, that he was just, there were 2 phases where like the last one he's standing, but in the first he's just kind of sitting, he's got the pages, he's the writer watching his creation kind of do the job for him.
Right.
And I was looking forward to, and this was true of some of the boss fights too, where like they would stop and have conversations, and I'm like, oh, more of this. This is great. And where I thought they would have maybe done act 1 in the fight, and then you do it act 2 or something, and I was like, no, they're just kind of just got to kill them and then to get to him.
Yeah, I do appreciate that it was a more interesting aesthetic than just like another cave or another manor or something like that. I appreciated that. Something I did really like about Simeon, the guy who ends up being the betrayal of Primrose, the gardener's apprentice, is he does that kind of cliche villain thing where it's like, what, you really think your father would be proud of you right now? Is this what you want? Is your revenge worth all of this bloodshed? And really just trying to get in there and manipulating her emotions, like, see, you're bad too. And I think the ownership that Primrose has in that story, where she's like, no, this is what I believe in. I am making this choice and I'm going to see it through. And she does. And at the end, which I thought was a really nice touch. She has some doubt about what she did, but she did see it through, and she did visit her father's grave. And that action and that commitment to that character that we were introduced to at the beginning. I really commend them on.
And you get an affirmation of that in the ending,
right?
When you get to the 8 scrolls or whatever, that she actually gets one communicated to her. Yeah, and I liked from Haunted. I just loved that I'm a hunter, and then the last thing I'm gonna go defeat the freakiest looking boss in the game, I think, of all the stuff that I faced, and just that it's a very clear. There's this evil, it's fighting this town, please, we need someone to save us. That's part of like why I like hunters. Just like, I'll save you, and then you come in and you do the job no one else can do.
One of my favorite scenes in the whole game, I think, ended up being with Hana, and she's not one of my favorite characters, but when she's in the snowy town and she meets up with that sage, and the sage is kind of into her and that awkward dance that they have with each other. It felt like just this small, cute moment where they kind of developed this very somber, very committed character in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it just kind of let the character breathe a little bit. I wish there were a few more moments like that with some of the characters.
Was not a fan of Ophelia. I thought her story was pretty...
Really not into Ophelia.
I clearly the oh no, the kid ran into the woods fight was like got to be the worst setup I've ever seen in an RPG for a fight. Just like, you couldn't think of anything to do with some tie to the church or something. Yeah. You only got 4 chapters, and one of them is like, no kids, don't fight. Like, it was weird. Like, I wonder if they were trying to go for her, you know, showing that she's on the small scene, folks. You know, like she's really digging into society and finding these little small problems, helping the little people in, you know, like literally kids. Doing
the notes and trying to refresh myself on everybody's story. What I did see, the kind of connecting theme, is she was an orphan who was taken in, who was very resistant at first, and so she kind of knew what it was like to feel like an outsider, and so I think it was kind of being like, okay, Ophelia, now it's your turn to go out in the world and give other people what they gave you. It still felt like maybe it being the focus of an entire chapter was a little bit much, but I definitely do think there's some sort of through line there with the characters they introduced. The thing that's frustrating about Ophelia is she's not an entertaining character to watch for reasons that we can get into, but I will say, when you think about her chapter 4 and like what happens and kind of the people she gets entangled with, it's one of the most obviously consequential chapter 4s. Like, it's pretty on the nose, dealing with like overarching things in a way that is dealt with a lot more obviously than some of the other characters.
I like that she salvages her friend too. I was like, oh well, writing you off, and then the end, it's like, oh, they're gonna stay friends. Okay, cool, unexpected. I thought she was just gonna, you know, get consumed in some evil flame or something, but like, oh no, she's still going.
Yeah.
It's a lot of she's a lot about forgiveness and kindness and caring, and but it just that area. Yeah, I think it was just like a through line, but you can see it at the end, and you know, especially all the stuff that she gets wrapped up with in chapter 4. But because she set out on a very specific mission, I was surprised how scatterbrained it got.
Yeah.
That it kind of didn't stay on course.
I think it's okay. Like, she's just a super goody two-shoes person. You're not going to probably see a moment where Ophelia gives in to a deep vice or something like that, which is okay. I think it's okay to have very good characters that can also be fascinating. I think, like, Alphen is kind of that way. But his good-naturedness, I think he has a little bit more doubt there. There's a little bit more exploration into what he believes, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't heal everybody, and that's just inherently more interesting than Ophelia like pretty quickly being like, nope, this is wrong. And I think what adds another layer on top of that is just the way that she speaks. She's so formal and stiff, and I understand they're trying to emphasize her being a cleric and being part of this holy order, but it just got to be so much at certain points that it was hard to stay engaged, I think.
You brought up Alphen.
Yeah.
The one where you catch the apothecary poisoning the people, I think might be one of my top 3 chapters. I really dug that. I actually told Amanda about that beat for beat. We were just driving somewhere, and I was like, I just finished this chapter. I think it's really clever. It was just very satisfying to show up just kind of knock knock like, oh yeah, it's me, I'm gonna disrupt everything you're doing. And I think it was fun for me too because Alphen was one of my kind of carry-on characters where like I had my main party and then I was like, oh, time to do everyone's chapter 2. And so like the hunter and the healer and either the warrior Ulbrich or Cyrus, I'm like, one of you drop out, bring in Alphen, and then I'm pretty confident going into this fight that I'm way over leveled and I will not have a problem with this. So it's just kind of fun walking into that cave being really cocky.
Yeah.
And just the puzzle solving that he has to do and like being frustrating that parent when he goes in to try to heal and she's like, no, get out of my house. I already had someone in here. And then kind of getting a chance again to help her and then discovering the mystery through that. There's just a lot of pleasant unpeeling of that mystery. And it had a satisfying conclusion.
That chapter specifically is kind of how I expected more of the chapters to feel, and there are definitely other examples that you can point to. I think you could probably point to Therion for this, where that chapter is kind of its own thing. It's kind of like its own individual story of this other apothecary who's taking advantage of people, and then it's immediately resolved within that chapter. I thought most of them were going to be like that. They were all going to kind of be little stories. And instead, it was the opposite, where a lot of them just kind of build on each other. And I think that works for some of them and really doesn't work for others. Ulbrich was one that was frustrating for me. Primrose was one that was frustrating for me. We already kind of talked about Primrose. Just to get into Ulbrich.
Yeah. Ulbrich I was not very satisfied with by the end.
I wasn't either.
I think the beats were exciting. I loved going into a tournament town and being like, oh please, oh please.
Yeah,
and then, like the first person I talked to, they're like, why you can't join the tournament? And it's like, I'm totally joining this tournament. So I that was satisfying for me. But there was a lot of this might be a JRPG thing. This might just be an RPG thing that a lot of the RPGs I've played recently, like Witcher and stuff like that, have just kind of eschewed. But this just ad nauseum repetition of the goal, where it's just like, why am I fighting? I don't know. And just meets another person. Hi, child. I don't know why I'm fighting. And like, why are you telling me this? It's just like, and then by the end, Ulbrich's like, I'm fighting to help people. And it's like, really?
Right. And exactly. Ulbrich really takes the wind out of his sails because the first chapter, I actually think, regardless of how much you enjoyed it, I think it does a pretty effective job of setting up this guy's quest in the same way that Primrose does. Where it's like, my whole identity was taken away from me by this friend who betrayed me and did something that was so horrendous that I've kind of sealed myself away and questioned my own identity. I thought that was a very good setup for a story. Earhart was the person that betrayed him. The problem is you go and you face off with Earhart, and he's like, actually, it was this guy named Werner who was pulling all of the strings. And then you go and you face off with Werner, and he's like, yeah, I did it because the gate of Finis was there, and it just didn't really feel as compelling or that there was any sort of build-up at all for this other guy behind the scenes. And I think that happened with Primrose too, where it's like, if you had introduced Simeon in chapter 1 and maybe just spent a little bit more time kind of convincing me of their relationship and how much they relied on each other, I maybe could have bought into it a little bit more, or it would have been a little bit more heartbreaking. But when he came on, I was like, this isn't right. Something feels weird here. But yeah, let's talk about Tressa, because I don't know how many people agree with me. I don't know if you agree with me, but that was one of my favorite chapters. For a couple of reasons.
The arc, you mean? Just the
arc.
Her stories, yeah.
Yeah, because it was definitely one of the lightest, and I don't say that in a bad way. I still think it was like kind of an emotionally satisfying ending with her being like, no, the journal is the best thing I can give you. I thought that was very sweet. And it felt very true to that character. Like, you have somebody who's just kind of wide-eyed and wants to soak up the world and wants to go on this adventure. And then at the end, she sees someone else and realizes an opportunity to give her the same experience. And so it loops back around in a way that I think is really good. The merchant that they introduced early on that really kind of sets her off, I think keeps coming back into the story in interesting ways. The other merchant who she runs into, who shows her up, keeps coming back into the story in interesting ways. And so I feel like there's this nice, like, we're introducing this thing, it will pay off later. We're introducing this thing, it'll pay off later. So it's this nice back and forth. And it wasn't ever so serious that you really had to put a lot of pressure on, like, oh boy, this moment better deliver. Because, like I said, with Ulbrich, sometimes I feel like when Octopath got super serious, it didn't have the ability to fully capitalize on the drama of those scenes. And so I think just like structurally in the ways that it used the characters and introduced, Tressa did really well.
It's funny. Now you're right. Like your analysis is correct.
I did. Is it?
Of Tressa.
Okay.
I think you raised really good points. At the time when she was like, the novel, I was like, all right, let's wrap this up. I might have been just tired by the end of it, but I was definitely like, why? But I mean, when you think about it, you talk about like the stuff that didn't work for us in other chapters. What is her friend? Ollie?
I have it. I'm really bad with names.
No, I think it's Ollie with the orange.
It's like Alfie. No, I have it.
I think it's Ollie.
It's Ollie. You're right. It is Ollie.
A-L-I.
Brandon's right.
And I played it. I like that character kept coming back, and
yes.
It just. I think the thing overall that I want to stress to acquire to the team that's working on this, because I think they just announced like today that there will likely be, if not sequels to Octopath Traveler, more games like this from Square Enix. This worked out very well for them. I think each of the chapters needs to build towards something that not only is important for those characters, but I can tell, oh, okay, we're starting to set the larger scene for what's going to happen at the end of this to bring all of these characters together. And I think they strayed from that in the interest of having the stories be different. I think they really wanted to have them all be different flair, like couple revenge tales, couple just classic journeys. You know, Luke Skywalker wants to go out and makes the name for himself. Other people that aren't sure kind of what they want to be, and so they're doing a mission that they think will answer that question for them, but they end up discovering something else. People doing a journey that they think of, people doing a journey like in Ophelia's case that are handed down to them over generations. And I think the effort was made, they kind of overkilled it by making things so different. So if you had like a comedic mission where it was like, oh, this one isn't as relevant as maybe another mission that I just did, I'm still putting in the same amount of work to finish it. I'm still fighting a boss that's just as difficult as the other thing. So it was like the structure of the game kind of set it up to be equal across the board, but then like the story beats weren't always kind of in sync with each other. And it's tough to really get a perfect experience because you're allowed to play them in any order that you want to, although there is kind of a level progression that's suggested. But that's the thing for me about Tressa, where it's like even those moments where I'm like, oh, this is kind of lighthearted and fun, I was also like just kept thinking, am I missing something? Is this does this tie into something else I did in any significant way? And then it wasn't really until chapter 4 I realized, no, they don't. We have to really get into the ending to be like, oh, that was his book, and got it.
I just feel like with Tressa, you really get to see the beginning of her. You get to see her, that initial, like, oh man, I really want to go out and see the world. Here are the people and the things that I'm encountering that are pushing me forward. And then along the way, here are the people that are testing me and making me grow. And then finally at the end, here's what I've learned and how I'm passing it on. It's just like a really nice, neat, organized structure. And like Therion was kind of difficult for me because there were so many things that character did that I liked. I liked this idea of this thief who was betrayed and had a hard time trusting people, and kind of through this act of shame, through getting this fool's bangle put on him, slowly came to trust people again. It's just, they don't really go into the cause of his pain until later. And so I don't really think we get Therion opening up as quickly as we need him to open up to get invested into what's going on with him. I think we just needed that past more immediately. And that's something I respect about Primrose. I feel like you know why she's so mad pretty quickly, which I like.
And I think I saw Primrose's journey, which is why she was one of my faves, in her and in her actions and behavior, and in kind of the resolutions that she came to at the end of the story, a lot more than Therion. I think Therion, there was an arc to his story, but I didn't see a different Therion really coming out of it. You know, like I could kind of tell that he wasn't, stubborn as his nemesis, whose name I can't remember. And it was clear when you got into the flashbacks of him and saw how he was treated by him and how he treats his men, and the stark contrast there. It was like, oh, I can see the difference between him and Therion already. It's not like Therion's like this and then needs to kind of like pull himself away from it. So yeah, I just didn't see him doing that, but I thought that was a fun story. I was ready for Heathcote to die. I was like, this guy's going down.
Yeah.
Like Heathcote's gonna come in at the end and like, oh, I'll save you, and he makes it through. Go Heathcote.
We've hinted at it already, and hopefully it's not too early to get into this, but I do think there is a lot to discuss. So at the end of the game,
this is what I want to get to. I mean, because
I think it's pretty essential.
I think all the characters, I think, us saying what are good or bad is not necessarily like a fact.
Right.
It's like I think everybody can take their own. It's interesting, people like arguing over starting characters,
right?
And being like, people just like, Primrose or nothing. You're like, okay, but I think everyone has their own preference, and by the end of it, I think the order in which you do things will probably speak to
absolutely
what your favorite things are.
I think
it's just kind of how the whole thing is structured is really what I want to dig into.
It's funny that you say that, because there were at least a couple of times where I saved Ophelia's chapter for the end, and I bet that made me even just a little bit more bitter towards it.
The huge regret I have is Honnet was both of our characters, and I finished Honnet and 2 other ones and didn't think. By that point, I'd forgotten she was like my main character. It's like I got credits and was like, oh no, I would have saved it.
Yeah,
I should have done the other 2 and then done Honnet last. Wow, I'm such an idiot. Why did I save it? I was just so excited to do it. When I got to that level.
I think I saved Honnet for last too.
No, I mean, I didn't, and so I was like, I still had 2 other ones to go, and so when I saw credits, I was like, wait, why am I getting credit? Oh, right, she's my
you did the
she's my central character. Oops,
I should have.
I still had Ophelia and Ulbrich to do after that.
I should have done it so I could have switched people out, but
I didn't. I mean, by that point, my central character is my highest level character, so why would I do that to myself?
All the way through chapter 4, I had a huge disparity in level where Honnet was rocking high, and then you had somebody 20 levels below them.
I had the gold team and the blue team.
Yeah,
that's how I did things. Blue was like Alphen, Tressa, Therion, and Primrose. Just like, have fun at the bar, everybody.
Yeah, and I know we're not talking about mechanical things, but I think going through the chapter bosses and all of the challenges there, I didn't have to dig into the jobs as much as the post game made me appreciate them, and I really appreciate having to split my party up into 2, because I was like, wow, every job in this game is good. Every job has at least a couple of things they can do that will really help you in the most trying of moments.
And the advanced jobs are so tasty.
Yeah,
when you finally get those, like, yes,
so
thank you for.
And they're some of the harder things in the game to overcome.
Yeah.
And so to have them be so useful, I think is a nice reward. And that is something that I do think Octopath does, not just mechanically very well, but also narratively. I think the post-game story and how it wraps into all of the stories and connects them in certain ways is some of the most satisfying story stuff in the game, but you really have to work to get there. Not only do you have to finish all 4 chapters for all 8 characters, you have to go and you have to do these couple of side quests, then you have to go and do this gauntlet of bosses, and I do think they give you a payoff in a way that is absolutely excellent. So let's get into it. What did you think about, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right, LeBlanc the Witch summoning this dark god, and how she was manipulating all of these people in all the different stories in order to make that happen?
It was cool once I learned about it.
Yeah.
Once I read that 8th document, I was like, oh, neat. I wish that was in there a little bit more. I don't know if that was intentional to like save that for the end in case people could have their own kind of distanced ending where everything kind of seems to not be so much connected. And then you learn, I think the owner of the manual is kind of the most, the one who I think touches the most lives.
Yeah,
really,
Graham Crossford.
Graham, like, saves Alphen and writes the journal, and then
Tressa gets her hands on it,
so that was interesting, and it's just funny of all of the idle chatter that they do in the bar, like that never comes up, and I just think it's really tough to do. Story balance in games like this is very difficult, and I think this game is really fascinating in how different it is. I think that's what I appreciated the most. Not necessarily like I like the way it's setting up the story in this game, but I like that it's different, and I really liked the crossing of towns. How I would go into one town and do one thing, and then come back in the town as another character and know some buildings and characters because I had already been here and already done something as someone else. But I didn't really hold any relevance to me, and it's just especially the ending. Like, the ending was the only time I directly compared this game to Final Fantasy VI. Like, there were so many other things. I was like, yeah, this, Final Fantasy VI is not doing that. There's not really like, there's not that much sense of like an overworld. There's just kind of paths, and like, you never get an airship, but you do get fast travel, and there's just so many differences that I'm like, I just think the story is structured differently. The actual fight to save the world is kind of done behind closed doors, like your average, like, the miners of Boulder Fall, like don't know that went down, whereas like everyone in 6 is affected by Kefka. You can't really miss him. So I really tried to not draw comparisons, and then I just thought, when I was like, God, his ending was just so weird and seemed like an afterthought, and then I thought about 6's ending, and it's like, I mean, clearly that is superior in the sense of, not only you splitting your parties, but you're splitting your parties and then doing a dungeon and then fighting him. And so you really have to think about party composition. You get lots of different chances to play with these parties once they're split up. And you get this big, confrontation with him where you at least get one character who steps forward at the end in 6 and says like, I'm fighting because I've learned this thing, or I've cherished this relationship that I have. Even Umaro's like, like they all get to say something and have a moment, and they're just kind of staring at her at the end, like, hey, we're just strong, and that's why we're here. Like, and so it was a bummer that there was no resolution. There was no opportunity for them to kind of share, for Alphen and Tressa to have that moment together of like, oh, Graham really touched us and really like helped us become who we are now. Maybe we can take his lessons, and especially after like I read each of these things, you read this wonderful and it's from the diary, which doesn't make sense because these are like messages from the afterlife, right? Like the one from
some of them,
the one from Primrose's dad is directly like,
yeah.
"Hi, Primrose, I'm dead." Like it's directly a conversation through the fabric of existence, and it's a bummer that Primrose after that I didn't get at least one line of her like, tear, nice, good to know, I'm cleansed. The party was just kind of like, okay, moving on.
Yeah, you're nailing on absolutely one of my biggest criticisms is Graham is somebody who is foundational in Alphen's life, like completely changes him as a person, and he's not only important in Alphen's life, he's important in all these other characters' lives, and you don't have one moment where they go like, hey man, like that guy means a lot to me too, or wow, I didn't know that. Just any sort of reaction, because I can understand when you're telling 8 different character stories, I can let go that there's not a ton of interaction there. I don't think you should have to force characters to chime in on everything. It's like, no, we are developing this character right now. If you want to see that other character, go do that thing. I can accept that. But in the moment that you bring them all together, it's like nonsensical. It's nonsensical that they're at this climactic point and they've been journeying together, which the game doesn't shy away from because you have travel banter where they'll comment on very mundane things that they're doing,
right?
But you're not commenting on the most crucial thing. And my other giant criticism with this part is, does it really just have to be white text that I'm scrolling through? Like, couldn't it be a scene?
Yeah.
Couldn't it be some little flashback where?
Well, yeah, that and like you can go to the thing and go through everyone's equipment, but you can't change jobs until you like put the person in your party and then change their job and then take them out of the party, and then because like I was trying to mess around with job combinations when I went to the end, so I'd go up the staircase. And they're like, switch 2 parties. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm like moving them around. And I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, I'll be right back. And then I go down the staircase and go back and like switch jobs. I did it like 4 times. And it's like, it just seems like kind of an afterthought,
right.
That like they didn't have set it up really in a way that you felt like, oh, I'm in a whole different type of dungeon now. It's like blue filter on the bosses, red eyes, text. Yeah. Cutscene, no VO. There's your quote unquote ending. It's like,
right. It feels very like, kind of thrown together in a way that is disappointing, because what I do commend them on is like, I'm sorry, but summoning a fallen god into the human realm is about as generic as you can get. Like right. It's hard to be like, oh my god, I can't believe the god is coming back. That is just
Caldera, no.
Yeah, that is just as tropey as it gets. But I think the reason why they made it work and why they made it interesting for me is it wasn't just that. It wasn't just behind the scenes scheming. There was a solid human story in Graham, and you really get to see an arc from there and what he goes through and the pain that he suffers and the lessons that he learns. And I thought that was nice, a good way to tie it all together.
What happens to Graham? He turns into Frankenstein, and then what?
No. He turns. So Graham's wife is dying. He goes to make an elixir for her. He's too late. He gives the elixir to Alphen.
Right.
The witch lady is like, hey, I can bring your wife back if you come with me because you're part of the sorcerer descendants. I need your blood to summon Galdera, my father. And he goes along because he wants to see what she's up to, and he's also kind of clinging to this hope. And he gets transformed into Red Eye.
Oh,
yeah. Well,
I missed that part.
That's pretty interesting.
I missed that part.
He gets transformed into Red Eye, the person who petrifies Honnet's master.
Got it. Missed that.
But he like interrupts the ritual halfway through, and
yes,
yeah.
I remember all of that. Yeah, from those letters at the end. But yeah, totally missed him becoming Red Eye.
And he stops the badness
cool.
from happening. So yeah, there's a lot of points from that, and the dragon stones that Therion is chasing after are necessary to open this gate to get Galdera.
The book that Cyrus is searching for is the instructions how to use those stones
from the far reaches of hell.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I think those stories are really cool. It's just, and I realize that they're presented as sprites, but even just seeing, Graham transforming into Red Eye and having some sort of magical effect, I think would have been so much more powerful if it wasn't just in text. So I think there was a missed opportunity. But hopefully, with the success of Octopath, the sequel will be able to lean in harder on some of those things.
Yeah, my big thing was, I think my two biggest complaints were the banter was fun, but there's gotta be, give me story banter. Pick one scene. Let's just start with one. Give me one per chapter, or maybe even per arc. So 8 total moments where in someone's story, someone else from the group comes in that's like, oh, hey, I know that pirate you're talking to because I'm Therion and I'm a thief and I know pirates, or just okay, I see where these two things would cross over.
Yeah.
And I think some characters naturally do that. Honnet and Ulbrich because they're warriors, Cyrus and Ophelia because they're scholars or they practice this magic and this kind of ethereal arts. And it was just surprising that that's never happened. And
you do have very light instances of that where
in the banter sometimes. And I like when so some of those things were pointed. You're right.
Yeah.
It's just the way the banter is set up is you have weird spotlights on them and they're across the area and just it would have been so much more impactful if I start a cutscene and then I look over and Honnet's here. She's actually in the room right now because that was my other major issue. And I think this was the paramount flaw of the story design. And it would seem like something that they went out of their way to shoot themselves in the foot to suggest that in every story instance, your character was alone all the time. And that's clearly not true. It's so weird.
Yeah.
And I remember doing the arena battle, and they were like, wow, Ulbrich, you did that all by yourself. And it's why are you specifically putting a button on that where that I was involved? And that's okay, because when I was in the arena and you fight the guy, he's got henchmen. A lot of bosses have people with them. So it is established that even though it's only 2 of us rushing at each other for the fight, other people in the room will still join the fight and be a part of it. And then I can understand that. But there were just moments where it really pulled me out of the story because I'm you're really suggesting haha, you're Cyrus, you're trapped in this dungeon. And what?
Right.
He's not. We're all there. And so it's just or maybe and that was the other weird thing was there were sometimes because Honnet and Ulbrich had their challenge ability where they would incorporate that into the story where they had to challenge. And so there were moments in the campaign where I had to do something by myself. So the game is already drawing these lines, but the story is not. And that was I think there were missed opportunities there of it'd be imagine a chapter. I think it would be really cool, especially with someone like Ulbrich, someone who's got a little more meat on their bones, where they have to do that boss fight by themselves. I think that'd be really interesting. Where it's no, it's kind of structured that way. It's a little easier than some of the fights.
You do have that where in Honnet's chapters where you're forced to provoke and get into those one-on-one battles.
Right.
But I do agree that maybe a little bit more of that kind of thing would be beneficial.
Just an awareness of who's around and why and
the spirit of what you're talking about reminds me of RPGs where you'll have everybody out talking to each other for a story scene and then they all squish together into one character after the scene is over. It's oh, you just disappeared into my body. That kind of sensation.
I was telling Ben a super nitpicky thing that I had a problem with was the characters swapping had to be 4 every time you created a party. And there were some times where it's I just want to be Tressa and Therion right now. That's it. you know, and then like you can't. You got to have 2 other people that you don't need just following you around. And just aesthetically, I'm a nerd. That like I'm like I just kind of want to see one character cruising through this town, and you know, like when Tressa got to Grandport.
Yeah.
I was like,
Gold Shore is what you're thinking.
I just want to be Tressa in Grandport.
Yeah.
And just walk around and see her, you know, like,
Go through all the
finally came
merchants.
here.
Yeah.
And just seeing like Therion like following her, you know. Weird that there was one cutscene that cracked me up, totally random, I'm sorry, where Ophelia, they were talking about like weird little things that they do, quirks that they have, and Ophelia's like, yeah, before I go to bed, I put my bookmark in my book this way, and Therion's like, yeah, when I break a window, I, you know, say this before I break a window, just go into someone's house and steal from them, and Ophelia's like, you're crazy. And it's like, Ophelia doesn't have a problem with it breaking it. It was the whole context for like robbing people was really interesting in this game.
One of the most perplexing things to me, and I mentioned this to you earlier, but to reiterate for the audience, is the travel banter. A lot of times, and every time it came up, I did it.
Of course.
Gotta see it.
You can't say no ever.
But so many times, not every time, but so many times, I was like, that was nothing. Like. Oh yeah, Cyrus is smart. That may be useful. It just felt
Primrose taught him how to dance.
Right. It like those things could be charming, but I felt they were just presented so blandly that it became very frustrating. And it was at the very end of the game. I'm almost positive the only thing I had left to do was the not post game, but like final dungeon, the Gauntlet of all the fights and all that stuff. And I went into a tavern and it was like new travel banter and. Alphen told this wonderful story about this lesson he learned from letter delivery. And he went into this whole thing, and it was actually pretty lengthy, and there was a good message at the end. And it wasn't super consequential, but it was like, wow, I'm getting a piece of this character's history. I'm kind of getting a very charming, fascinating story. Where was this the whole time?
Yeah.
And then I thought about it some more, and I was like, wait a minute. I'm getting more insight into this character. I'm getting non-fluff stuff after actually going on an incredible journey with them. And that's kind of cool, but still frustrating. Like, I think you could have given me, I would have had a very similar sensation like 30 hours ago. Like, it still would have been a lot of time in the game. And so, yeah, I hope for the next one, if there's a next one and they do it this way, that it's very obvious that they're capable of investing me in these characters or giving me things to latch onto and just finding better, more consistent ways to deliver that.
I think, you know how when you find hidden items, they pop up as a little exclamation point on the map?
Yeah.
I think it would be fun if in towns there was some marker that denoted one of those banter moments, and it had nothing to do with who was in your party at the time. So you could load one that's this person's not in your party. It's just you've reached this point in the story where there's other things if you want to dive a little deeper.
Yeah.
Like case in point, one that would be interesting would be like if like a character, doesn't matter who it is, and Primrose were like, there's at her dad's grave, there's a note, and you can like hit it, and then a character will be at her tombstone, and Primrose will be like upstairs, and they're like, hey, isn't there where her dad's buried? And she's like, yeah, but I don't want to go there until we finish the mission, you know, just to like jam that one home. I think that would be interesting because part of also the other issues about the banter was you're right in the middle of doing something. It's like, okay, I got to switch people out in my party, or I'm going to go into this, you know, this tavern and see if I can like rob somebody or purchase something from them, or inquire for a quest or something like that. And it's like, you want to hear the conversation? And you're like, all right, you know, it's like what a horrible way to like start a scene in an RPG. Just no context, randomly out of nowhere. It almost like kind of has to be dumb and random the way that it's set up. And so I missed those little tiny beats that would happen when you're in that moment where you're ready for story, where you're like approaching the narrative moments and like ready to receive them, and then you get a little extra on top of that.
Speaking of like path actions, there are actually some kind of cute, clever bits when you're inquiring or scrutinizing somebody and it will reveal information about them. I just think repetition can be a problem where once you do that dozens of times and you also know that there might be loot to get, you're just not as receptive maybe to those cute bits. I feel like with so much of Octopath Traveler, if they had been a little bit more inventive with how they presented information, because by like the time I got to chapter 4, and I mentioned this in the review, it's like, yep, I bet we're going to start with some story. We're going to do a little dungeon. We're going to do a boss. We're going to get some more story. And it's just when you do the same trick over and over and over again, it's not even that trick is bad. It's just you get numb to it. And not to like play favorites or anything, but I think about the Final Fantasy games that I love so much and how many crazy moments there are where it's like, oh my God, I'm going to this beach and this giant mechanical spider is chasing after me and I have to avoid it, otherwise I got to get into this boss fight. Or you know, I'm starting the game in this bombing mission. Like there's just so much variety. Or I'm playing like I'm cross-dressing to get into this guy's thing. And for me, a lot of the best role-playing games have those moments where they really kind of pull the rug out from under you, and it's not just the typical, hey, we're fighting, hey, we're talking to people, hey, we're talking some more. And so for an Octopath 2, I'd really like to see that.
I would almost love a 3-act structure. Just give me 3 chapters per character, beginning, middle, end.
Yeah.
You know, the beginning of the journey, the thing that I learned, and the setup for the final confrontation, and then just add a ton of incidental stuff that happens in between.
Sure.
Basically make the intermissions between those chapters be more focused around everybody.
Sure.
And then I got to get through a mission, doesn't matter who I bring, then you get all these fun little interactions. One person on Twitter brought up Chrono Trigger, where they're like, there were differences depending on who was in your team, who would say what to what. And then now it's time to get back into the chapter and then pick who I want, and then the story will be affected. But when you build a new system like this, I imagine there's just so many different ways you can do it. I imagine just the board of how they tied everything together could just be strung up in so many different ways.
Right.
So it's tough to criticize things because you're like, this game that did 8 chapters, 8 stories, 4 chapters each per act or whatever, like they did it right. Like no one's ever done this before, and so it's hard to critique something that's that is in a lot of ways fresh and unique, but somewhat lacking in other areas, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I mean, to its credit, you can definitely play favorites. You have a ton of control over what you experience and when.
And I love these characters. Like by the end of the story, I definitely felt an affection for them. It was a bummer that like they never got an HQ or an airship or some, someplace they could all call home. And I did love that. And there was another flaw that like I loved that Tressa's parents are there. If you put Tressa in the party, they don't say anything to her, but they're there. Alphen's home is still there. They establish what building he lives in, and you can go back to that spot. And like I'm a sucker for stuff like that, where this is their home, this is where they come from. I love those moments. Like just because I started the game in Hanet's hometown, like that's where my save file is now. And I was like, all right, I'm going to stop playing this game for a while. I'd always go back there and buy my, items from there first before I would like tour the world. Would love it if there was some town that sold everything. I always hate that in RPGs, especially when you get to Grandport. I can't buy every herb type in Grandport. Please. Come on.
Yeah, I ran into that where it's like, wait, I need this type of herb. Which place do I go? And just the ruins of Hornburg, having that kind of be the final place that you go.
Now we're talking. You know, when I went up around that tent, I was like, oh, this is the tent.
It was like, wait a minute, it feels cool that I'm here.
Yeah.
Because you established its importance so well through Ulbricht's story. I thought that was a pretty awesome moment. And the other thing that I want to comment on, and again, this is something that I mentioned to you, so you're going to have to hear it again, but the way that you spread out across the world, I think, is just pretty genius.
Yeah.
Where all the character stories kind of start in a small circle and then just slowly expand outward. I really felt like I was familiar with the entire world, and that I went across a map all over the place in all different sorts of directions instead of just in a line or in a line that branches every once in a while. I felt like I went on an adventure, and I think that is a more difficult thing to accomplish than we probably give games credit for.
I like that there are some RPGs I've played in the past where I am told by the game that I'm in a large city now, and I'm like, okay, it's still 2 hallways and 8 spots I can interact with, the same as any other small village.
Yeah.
It just, looks bigger, like the background has more buildings in it, but like the map isn't actually a bigger, or I don't get a sense there's any kind of different functionality. And I've said this on Frame Trap, I will say it again here. The towns, I think, were my favorite part of this entire game. I think they executed so well. The town music across the board was stellar. I definitely felt a completely different vibe.
The music across the board was stellar.
Yeah, it was really good. But even like desert towns, even like the Wellspring, I think, like being around this lake in the middle, just this kind of like fun tropical vibe, more trees, a little bit of grass.
The moment for me was seeing the crashed ship And it was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I did not expect that.
But even the same like biomes, towns would have a distinct vibe. And the big town that has like 2 lower areas and the bigger area up top, Stoneberg. I don't know.
Stoneguard. I have it written down.
It was the one that there were 3 zones. Not a lot of towns have that. I think it's the only town that has 3 screens just for one town. Usually there are 1 if 2 or in some cases 1.
Stoneguard is where you, Lucia, the headmaster's assistant, traps Cyrus. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. It's also where Haunted meets the lady that knows her master that helps her. It's huge. It's just a really big place, and it's neat to go into those zones. I don't think there should be just 1 bar per town, but that's just me. It's like, what screen is that bar on? Oh, there it is. By the end of this game, I had each of these maps pretty memorized. But I just loved that. I loved the difference in scale and vibe, and the stories fit them, and the contextual actions that you could learn about each person and who they connect to. And one thing that bothers me greatly in a lot of RPGs I've played in my life, and I'm like kind of still waiting. Cyberpunk's like, oh, those buildings are so huge, but I know I can not explore really any of that. I'm like curious to see how that world will come to life. Just the believability of, am I actually actively inhabiting this space realistically with the other people that are already here. And I think they did a great job stylistically, kind of getting away from spoiler stuff, but like with seeing like a house here or there in the background, denoting that like there's still more town that you just can't see. There's houses you can't get to, like you're just focusing on the main specific stuff. And like I said, I loved when you would discover a haunted house or just, break into someone's manor. And then I would come through that area as another character and be like, I've been in that house. I know who lives there. I know why they're important to the story. So yeah, towns. Yeah. There's my thumbs up for towns.
If I had to be extremely unfair and ask for things that are admittedly a pretty high ask. So I've been going through Suikoden 1 and 2, and one thing I greatly appreciate there is how many people you can recruit, and how a lot of times that ends up being its own story. And you can kind of do that in Octopath Traveler, where there are so many people that's like, I want you, what abilities do you have? I would be okay with being able to do that to far fewer people, but have it be more of a process, or have that trigger a more significant story, because you do have to do that for some of the side quests, but just, I guess, have it feel a little bit more intimate and consequential more of the time.
Yeah.
I guess. How did you feel about the side quests in general?
The only side quests I completed were by accident. I never sought out a side quest. And I completed a bunch of them just because I think about 3 or 4 times I made the pass, the thief purchase pass, where I just hit every single town, talked to every single NPC, checked who I hadn't talked to, who I hadn't stolen from, or purchased something from if I was unable to steal it or it was too risky. Therion's thieving skill is by level, I guess? Because I did one more pass at the end, and I could steal everything.
The same is true with Inquire, where it's like you have to be a certain level to inquire this person.
Got it. I felt bad because I saved up all this money, and in the end, I was like, oh, I can just steal everything. Yeah. Cool, thanks.
And you get incredible gear from stealing. Like, very good.
There are many unopened purple chests in my playthrough. But there's so many elements to this game, I completely forgot what specific question you just asked.
How do you feel about the side quests in general?
So a lot of the side quests that I finished were, I just happened to have gotten that item from somebody, and now in my third pass through this town, I'm turning the thing in. And they were fun. I just thought I echo your sentiment that you said in the review, where they were just super vague. And it was interesting how, hidden items and some things just really like telegraphed where they were, and side quests just like, give me a town at least or something, give me some kind of direction, or maybe have fewer of them and have them have more impact, but just not something. Maybe this was because I was trying to play this game as fast as humanly possible, but not something I initially felt the desire to navigate toward, and once I started to reap the benefits of, was not like, oh, this is clearly something I got to do.
This is perhaps the most nitpicky thing I could say, but I think that's okay at the end of a spoiler mode to get into that territory.
Yes.
If you're gonna give me an item after the final boss, have it have some significance.
You get like 100,000 leaves, right?
You get you get some amount of money.
100,000 leaves say nothing.
You get some amount of money. I don't actually remember the specific amount.
I haven't finished the last boss fight.
That
I
I
watched
didn't care
it.
about. But you get this accessory that allows you to not be in random battles. What is the point?
Well, for me, I would actually appreciate that. Well, again, I would appreciate that because then I would get to explore some of the outer areas, maybe do some dungeons I didn't do before. But to what end? You know, like,
right?
Like I could all the purple chests I can go open now without being harassed, and it's like to level up to then do what? You've done the hardest challenge in the game, so DLC maybe, probably not, right?
Probably not.
Yeah.
For me, I guess it was like I'm already super strong. Like running away from stuff or not getting engaged with stuff doesn't seem.
Yeah.
And I have skills that allow me to not be in combat all that often. I don't know.
I can once I cross the 100-hour mark, I tend to get that completionist itch. It's like, well, I already put in 100 hours,
I hear
so
you,
I
man.
can see the temptation of like, why don't I just do everything? All right, why don't I just steal from absolutely every person?
If Octopath Traveler had trophies in it, I put so much time into it that it'd be tempting not to.
A nitpicky thing that just popped into my mind, but it's just kind of funny. I wasn't really agitated because the game I think is sizable, and I didn't feel the need for like more places to visit or more dungeons and caves and towns and stuff. But it is kind of funny how when you first get these initial towns, and then it was interesting seeing their little quest markers in just a void. You know, we're like, okay, I finished chapter 2 and chapter 3 is just over here somewhere, and like I haven't been there yet, and just wow, I wonder what's over there. I wonder what that looks like, and just wow, look at all these this unexplored area I haven't been to, and then you like fill in the bottom right, and it's like this is all just mountains.
Yeah,
you're like, oh, okay, it's a good thing you filled that part in. All right, but then again, it's a fairly expansive map. I was not want for more towns.
No,
they give you plenty.
I wasn't either. The world
compared
felt sizable
compared to most RPGs. Just I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but just a lot of towns, a lot of different places to go to, a lot of names to remember, a lot of different governments, and it was neat going to that one town that was like hanging people. You know, that like seemed super bleak and smoky and had lots of torches burning and.
Maybe not a fair comparison, but
I'm sorry, lighting people on fire. They had pyres going.
Just hearing everything that you're saying about towns and what you get out of them and how much joy you find in seeing the variety. Man, you should play Divinity Original Sin 2.
Yeah.
The game has a lot of towns and like really in-depth stories and so many cool secrets.
I bet I'd be stuck somewhere for a very long time.
Yeah, it has a lot of it. Or at least it feels like there's a lot, or there's so much you can do that you're like, oh, this is boundless.
Now that it's on PS4, no excuse at all. Lazy.
Yeah. When we get into game recommendations, though, it's probably time to wrap things up. I hope you enjoyed us nerding out, talking about different aspects of the story, bouncing around to things that we liked, things that we didn't.
And I just want to say, as we're wrapping this up, to you personally, Ben.
Yeah.
It was really fun playing this RPG with you
and
talking about
fun.
stuff. There's so many moments. I didn't play Persona 5. I haven't played Pillars of Eternity. I haven't, it's like there's something so out of WoW. Like there's so many moments. Not even we wouldn't play Monster Hunter together. It's just a lot that you're interested in that I love from afar, but don't have the time to invest in.
I dream about these moments.
This took away from a lot of things I should have been doing.
Yeah.
But I have no regrets because it was very fun to chat about things with you. And
Dragon Quest right around the corner.
Well, yeah, and I will play Dragon Quest, but that's the thing is I'm not gonna rush Dragon Quest. You know, so like you and I are gonna have a killer conversation in January about Dragon Quest 11, where I'll be like, I beat it.
And I think that's okay. And obviously, the good people at home can let us know. But like the Persona 5 spoiler mode came well after the fact.
Yeah.
But that was great because we got Huber in there, we got Brad in there, and I felt like it was still a valuable, exciting conversation to have. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, not only in sitting down and chatting with me and nerding out about characters and stuff like that, but also committing to play through that beast. Because it's very long. It's a long game.
Portable, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I played this
I know,
I played a lot of this game at Comic-Con, so it's just like having that on the train,
Switch.
having them in the hotel.
Yeah, it's nice. Well, at the same time, there are things about playing Dragon Quest on a nice big TV that are...
I can't wait.
I mean, you can do that with Switch, but you know what I mean. Yeah. If you're watching the show, that means you support us on Patreon. This is a Patreon-exclusive show. Not something that we've done a whole lot of yet, but we'll continue to do. There will be more game spoiler modes, more movie spoiler modes. Please let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. We are listening to you. We are shaping the show around your feedback. And, of course, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.